right, this is If My People Bible Reading, part 154 in the book of Daniel. Um, we're going to start at the end of chapter 1 and where it begins at chapter 2. So um, 121 says, And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. He was there for a number of kings. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. He simply remained, and he did a tremendous job. Um, so he was there until he passed away. What do we get from that for today? How can I apply that to today, living as a Christian, as a Messianic who believes in the Yeshua? I have to be very clear about the Yeshua, not another one coming. The Yeshua. Uh, how can I apply that today? Well, Daniel was one of the most remarkable men in the Bible. Would you agree? And Daniel was extremely close to Yahweh. Would you agree? And Daniel was given incredible visions, and the detail and the thankfulness and the prayer back and forth was incredible. Would you agree? Having done all that, and you'll notice other than like Elijah, or Elisha, especially the first one, Moses, even Abraham, Daniel didn't complain. He was a non-complainer. And so he was rewarded by Yahweh to go back to Jerusalem to help build the temple that Ezekiel laid out very clearly in his 13 scrolls, right? Wrong. That's a lesson for us today. That's the big lesson we get from the book of Daniel. We do not and should not, because once again, the errant churches, they spend so much time on Daniel as the prophecy of the end times. Well, yes and no. Yes, that's true that the churches spend a lot of time, and the reason they spend so much time in the same stories year after year after year up on the pulpit, when they do mention something about the word versus their own personal stories, or what they learned in theological institutes, um, is that they left out all the other prophets that were not minor prophets. The books are small, so they were called minor prophets because the books and the scrolls were small. But detailed in those scrolls, there's no way to just read Daniel and then Revelation to understand Revelation, which takes you right back to Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. You're not going to get it. And that's why that's why instead of one church, the Catholic Church would love to claim that they are the universal church. Catholic, universal, one world church. They'd love to have that claim. But no, there's 30,000 other churches, but churches' names, doctrines, and theologies of their own traditions of men competing against it. So what a mess this is. If they could just look at Daniel. Daniel just did his job, and he didn't complain for his entire life, even though he was kidnapped, and even though he was sent to lions, and even though that he was going to be turned to char, worse than a nuclear explosion, it didn't seem to bother him, did it? But boy, the whiners and complainers today, if we don't even have toilet paper, we just fall apart. Goodness sakes. What did people do for 20,000 years when they didn't have toilet paper? As as close friends of mine would say, well, they just went around with stinky rear ends. No, they didn't. People were very clean, and they know how to stay clean their entire lives. Just like Yeshua, he was a human, okay? So he stayed clean. What a world we live in. Oh, let's get to chapter 2, what's a good one here? 26. The king asked Daniel, also called Belshazzar. Now, many of your Bibles have explanations in here, but I'm not sure that they have this one. Daniel is not Daniel, it's Daniel, or Daniel. means lion of, not Judah, lion of Yahweh, Elohim. Could you imagine Nebuchadnezzar saying, "Come here, lion king"? Instead, he names him Belshazzar. Well, what does that mean? Well, you got to go all the way back, and the Hebrew ain't going to help you there. You got to go back to Arabic and so forth. And so, what does it mean? It just means the 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 one who protects me, the one who protects the king. It's a pretty good name. So, you know, Nebuchadnezzar likes saying that. Hey, the one who protects the king, come on here and see me. Verse 27. Oh, let me read both of it. Then the king asked Daniel, also called Belshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and then interpret it in a question?" That was a question. Daniel replied, "No, wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is an Elohim in heaven." Now, he doesn't call him Yahweh or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. He doesn't use any of the and he doesn't use the word God, G-O-D, and he doesn't use the word G-A-W-G, gold, which is, by the way, Babylonian. It is not an American word. We should not be, once we learn that God's name is not God, we should never, ever, ever use that word again, folks. That's a pagan name. And for those who listen to me and know me, you already know that. I'm just talking to other people that just clueless. But I've always called him that name, and I'm going to continue calling him. Okay, so he tells him all these things. When the king asks something, he goes, either tells him immediately or he goes to prayer. And he finds out. He doesn't just do things in a lackadaisy way. That's one thing that the Nebuchadnezzar appreciated. Nebuchadnezzar can turn things on. He could be the selfish, pious, non-Yahweh loving king that ever existed, and at the same time he could sit there and say, you who answer only and know only the Yahweh knows, only the Elohim knows things and so forth. And Nebuchadnezzar can really talk up a story. He was a politician, wasn't he? Yeah. You don't know what he's thinking because he goes, whichever the way the wind blows is good for me. That's what I'm going to say. That's the definition of a politician. Daniel, Belshazzar, on the other hand, he was not a politician at all. He was a statesman. He told it like it was, and be damned whatever happens. So in the history of all our presidents, where we at 45, 46 right now, whatever, there was only one that really told the truth the entire time, and the results cost him his life, and that was Abraham Lincoln. He was not a politician. He was a statesman. Amazing. Even Washington, he was a statesman to a certain degree, but boy, he sure knew how to play the politics. When he needed to make some money, and he created laws, George Washington back in those days, so that he could make beer and other things, and then he made it against the law for anybody else to do it, so he had the monopoly. They don't tell you about that in history books, do you? They're in there. You just got to really, really read what happens. And well, that's okay. Let's go to chapter 3, verse 25. Let's do 24 first. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw in that fire?" And they replied, "Certainly, O king." And he said, "Look, I now see 4 men walking around the fire." There's Daniel's friends. So his friends had to go to the fire. Daniel had to go to the lions. His friends had to go to the fire. It was not such a happy place there. Yeah, they were treated very well for all those years, but, that's not so well, is it? It took a almighty presence to keep them from being burned to death. In other words, in all weighty matters, in our comment, put your trust in Yahweh. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Put your trust in him. That's what you get out of that. That's what you get out of the book of Daniel. All these stories and visions and all this stuff that later on will make more sense when we get to the book of Revelation. Right now, they're just story. And just remember this. Remember this. Revelation is not set linear, and then this happened, and then this scroll was opened, and another scroll was opened, and another scroll was opened, and there was a bowl, and then there was another bowl, and then there was another bowl, and then there was this wrath, and there was that wrath, and then there was this wrath. It goes like this. It doesn't go like that. That's not Revelation. Those visions are kind of going here, going there, going forwards, going backwards. As we go through Daniel, it's the same thing. You're looking at, they're talking about in the future, they're talking about in the premillennium, they're talking about in the wrath of the Father, they're talking about the tribulation with the beast and so forth. And then they jump over to talking about the leopard kingdom, talking about the Grecians, talking about Alexander, talking about his four generals who took over after and split the kingdom into four after he perished somewhere in Iraq, in the Babylon area. It goes back and forth all over the place, and this was written. The latter part of this was written in Hebrew, and so there's no break. There's no paragraphs, and there's no listings of chapter 2, chapter 4, and then they name the chapters. That's not how it's done. So you don't take American or Western thought or Grecian Hellenistic behavior, teaching and learning, which most of us have had, and you do not read the prophetic books, especially Daniel, especially Revelation, the revealing, in that fashion, because you're not going to get it. And then you try to piecemeal it and put it here and put it there. It doesn't work. Just listen to what's being said. For instance, let's go to chapter 4, verse 9. I said, Belshazzar, chief of the Magi, and that whatever your Bibles say, but I use the word Magi. I know that the Ruach of the Kadosh Elohim is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here's my dream, interpret it for me. So here we go again. I just want to mention the word Magi there. You don't hear about this later on until the Gospels, when the Magi came from the east. And here's just something to just put in your head and listen. There's all through the Word, it speaks of looking to the heavens, and the heavens in its majesty are all showing everything that exists. Today, we live in a society that it's very hard to look outside because most people live in cities, and you can't see anything. You might see Venus, and you see the moon, and you see the sun. And during the day, you see chem clouds all over the place because the military, and there's 1,000 reasons that people are doing this, and some of them are good reasons and some are bad reasons. But if the military wants to put up that stuff on certain days to hide things so that satellites can't see through, and that heat-seeking satellites can see heat and different forms of light and wavelengths cannot see through, well, that's why they do it. And if there's other reasons, because they put chemicals in there so that it tries to get rid of the radiation, because we've exploded, as I've said before. If you count them atomic bombs, nuclear bombs are much, much more powerful than that. The Tsar bomb of Russia, that was a nuclear device, and it was like 20,000 nuclear bombs, 20,000 atomic bombs going off. But about 34,000 atomic bombs have been set off in the earth, on the earth, and under the sea, and in the sky since 1945. And so, yeah, man has been trying to do that. I worked as a chemist for years, and wearing the little chemical badges and wearing the masks here that, by the way, just to say, because we're almost in here, and then we'll start again at 1:55. I wore a mask for 40 years in a laboratory. You don't wear a mask all day long. You have to change it out 20 or 30 times a day. Wearing this mask for COVID is a joke. And any chemist worth his salt can tell you that. Any scientist, any doctor who tells the truth will tell you that. Yeah, what can you say? I don't believe anything you say. I'm going to keep wearing my mask. Well, just keep touching it about every 5 minutes too, and then you don't wash hands, then you feel sorry for people like that. Okay, see you at 1:55 in the book of Daniel. Shalom.